Okay, let's talk about the meme that is the Zapotron. Now, it actually came up yesterday or a few days ago on stream where somebody asked, like, what if one of the most underrated weapons in the game could just one-shot everything? And I immediately said, Zapotron, because it is a bad weapon. I don't want to get any ideas mixed here, but you can actually deal a significant amount of damage. Now, there are a couple of ways to run this. We'll get into that later, but let's talk about exactly what the Zapotron does. You can just shoot normally for an okay amount of damage, or you can charge it up to do tons of damage, and that is really, really tricky because it says on the sheet as well that it can shoot through multiple enemies, but in my experience, it can't. I could be doing it wrong, but I'm going to treat this weapon like it doesn't have that well of, crowd clearing damage because it effectively didn't, at least in my gameplay. Again, I could have done something wrong, but even if you can shoot through multiple enemies, this is kind of an expensive weapon because you are using energy cells, although you're only using 2 per shot, 6 if you charge it. It's still going to be an expensive weapon to run, and you kind of need to guarantee one-shot something if that's going to be its purpose. Now, I did run this up against a Smasher a couple of times, and it did do pretty decent damage. You get a massive headshot multiplier, which is very important. I did not always go for the head, as I wanted to get the full image of this weapon, and it's definitely a side piece kind of weapon, where you want to be running a primary weapon that's going to be dealing with larger crowds more effectively, and then save the Zapotron for the bigger targets. And I say that it's a meme because this weapon didn't used to do a ton of damage. It used to do pretty good damage, but it definitely got a massive damage buff. In fact, I haven't actually pulled this up while I'm recording, but I'm going to do it right now because I'm actually curious where it went. So looking under the sniper section, and we're looking at, a 96% damage buff to the Zapotron, which is significant. That's nearly double. That is essentially, effectively for our purposes, double damage. And that is helping it, but when a weapon shoots as slow as it does, requires you to charge, and then has no crowd clearing, or maybe it's bugged and it just has really bad crowd clearing, either way, this weapon needs more if it's going to be a primary weapon or something you're going to use at all. So it's often touted as like one of the worst weapons in the game, and I think before the damage increase, it probably was. But it's definitely not something that you can completely discard because it does do some decent damage. Now, it did get some infamy when it was a weapon in BR for a while. I don't know if I can even find footage of this, but they did introduce it to BR where it was one-shotting everything for a brief period of time, and then they took it out and never put it back. So I can imagine that was probably a good decision, but hey, maybe we'll see it in Battle Royale in the future someday. I don't know. Am I calling it? Are we doing that right now? Maybe people are going to be coming back to this video in the future. I don't know. I'm just saying. But for now, that is currently not the case. So if you're going to be running the Zapotron, let's get into the different perks you might want to use for this. Now, I should have mentioned this earlier, but I did not run a sniper loadout for this weapon because of what I said, where I do not believe that this should be a primary weapon. This is not a weapon that you should be running without any other weapon to support it because it's not going to be able to eliminate everything very effectively. So I did not run a normal loadout. I ran a shotgun loadout. And in fact, a lot of my gameplay, if I recall correctly, I was running a Pulsar 9000 because the crowd clearing was so ineffective on this that it was almost silly. So I was more or less demonstrating that it's better as a support weapon for the harder hitting targets like a mini boss or maybe a mini, like a mist monster, I'm trying to say. The zappy faces and takers are definitely going to be annihilated from the Zapotron. Now, I ran a crit build on this, and I wouldn't even necessarily recommend that. I just wanted to keep it standard with everything else that I run, but I would actually recommend perhaps maybe a headshot damage or a fire rate or, maybe a damage perk on here. We'll talk about all this in a second, but what I'm saying is you really want to take advantage of that headshot multiplier and then aim for the head if you can. When you are shooting a weapon like this that charges slowly and you get one shot and it shoots, slowly in that regard, 38% of the time doing the damage you really want to be doing is simply not enough, and I kind of regretted running a crit build on this, but let's start down here with the 6 perk. So I recommend a couple, depending on what you're trying to do. I like Affliction because of the recent updates. Affliction is actually really quite strong. It ticks away for a lot of damage over a long period of time. Well, 6 seconds that is. But that can actually add a lot of extra damage per shot and allow you to move on to a different target more effectively. However, if you are aiming for the head, causing an explosion with that elimination could actually be rather effective. But 5 headshots in a row is simply not going to happen unless you're God tier, and I don't suspect that is a reliable 6 perk to bank on. So if you're going to be running this with those perks, the 6 perks should obviously be damage to mist monsters and bosses, which I think would actually be better more normally, but I guess you can pair it with Afflicted. But generally speaking, with the Zapotron, you're not trying to take a second shot. So your first shot's not going to have that damage to Affliction. So I might even recommend mist monsters and bosses even if you have Affliction on it, because I think it would be more effective immediately. And then, of course, for the perks, I think a reload perk is recommended. You have a pretty decent reload time on this, and you do fire the entire mag if you charge it to full, so it's nice to get that second shot off as soon as possible. So I'm going to stand by my recommendation as a reload perk, being on there, but like I said about the crit build, I'm not 100% sure that it's necessary. I think that headshot damage might be the better way to go, and you might want to just make sure that you can hit a headshot with this weapon because you want to make it count. And then, of course, finally, you're going to want to put a damage perk on that just to make sure you're doing as much damage as possible. DPS-wise, you always want to crit build, but the Zapotron's not a DPS weapon. You're not firing tons of shots at one target. You're firing essentially one shot to eliminate an enemy one time. And, of course, you're locked to energy. So it's a really interesting weapon where it's like, it's kind of a meme. It's really bad, but it's also kind of not that bad, but it's not a weapon that I'll ever be using seriously, and this video was something I was peer pressured into. Everybody kept commenting it, and then they started liking each other's comments, telling me that people really wanted me to cover the Zapotron, and here you go, okay? This is your Zapotron video. I finally put it into the video. We're here. It's been covered and addressed. This is a bad weapon that's, like, admittedly kind of good sometimes, and I don't know what to do with it. Now, I would recommend, if you don't care about energy cells, to perhaps just consider the Storm King's Wrath, because it essentially does exactly what the Zapotron does, but when you charge it up, instead of doing more damage, it shoots more enemies, and that is very, very effective. It's doing lots more damage without having to charge up. However, it is costing 20 energy cells per shot instead of 2 to 6, because it's shooting 2 per shot. You can charge it to 6, but the Storm King's Wrath charges to 60. So it's essentially 10 times as many 10 times as many cells, but you get a much more guaranteed kill and, group damage, which is also nice. So when that kind of thing exists, I'm not 100% sure I can ever recommend the Zapotron, but hey, if you are really that kind of person, you have my perk recommendations and you can go for it. But I guess if you're seriously trying to use this and you're just a meme lord of the day, I can probably just recommend essentially my bow loadout here, but tweak it a little bit. Meaning, instead of Farah in the lead, you might want to consider Redline Ramirez in the lead for that fire rate, which I don't think you'll need. Maybe you want to go into the crit build and get Rabbit Raider Jonesy in the lead. 38% of the time, you're going to be hitting for a crap ton of damage if he's in your support. As the lead, I should say, that 225% goes a long way. And if you are going to use either of these in the lead, I don't recommend Farah because, the Zapotron's not a bow. But if you are going to be putting something in the support, I have to recommend the Thick Skeleton Lady because you're going to be reloading after essentially every shot. And if it takes you less than 5 seconds to line up that next one, then why not get a 15% bonus damage? Because, hey, that could help you. That could be the difference between eliminating the enemy and not. Maybe you don't crit and you want to get that extra damage. I don't know because you shouldn't be using this weapon. I wish they would update some of these older weapons because I feel like the Zapotron is kind of like a typical one-hit kill laser cannon from Save the World, but it charges up, which is not a good thing in this game. You don't want to be charging up damage because it takes you out of the fight for a long period of time, and it needs to absolutely one-shot if you are going to. So maybe if it chained like the Storm King's Wrath, this weapon could actually be useful because I've always liked the aesthetic of it, and I feel like it being a legitimately viable weapon would make a very, very fun method of playing this game, and it could add to the enjoyment that we get from it. But that's it for today's video. If you guys will support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. It definitely supports me. If you guys want to see more meme videos like this, then harass me on my Twitch down in the link description below. You can definitely thumb up comments down below if you guys want me to cover certain stuff, but that's that I will leave to you guys as I am not sure what you want to see next. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. And then